Hello and welcome back to my Central Virginia garden. For those of you who are new to the channel, my name's Rebecca. I garden in Central Virginia. I generally am a no-dig or no-till gardener, which for me has been a fantastic method for growing great vegetables. Let me just tell you a little bit about how I got started in gardening and how I got started in the no-dig system. And also let you know that it's now December, late December, it's perfectly good time to start a no-dig garden bed that will be ready for you to plant in the spring. So I'll tell you a little bit about that as well in this video. So as I said, I'm a no-dig organic gardener in Central Virginia. When I started gardening, I was like many other people during the pandemic, and then I subsequently retired here to the farm, the place where I grew up. And it's been a joy and a pleasure to be here and be able to spend so much time here. And one of the things that I have really begun to do so much more of is gardening. I'm going into my 6th season as a gardener here in this space. Now the space around me is what I call my main garden or my lower garden. It is not massive, but it is not a small garden, and it has been built over time using the various ways of no-dig gardening. So I'll give you a little tour around about that, and you can take a look. I'll talk a little bit about the beds that I made and how I did this. I got into no-dig gardening because this earth out here is deep, red, heavy Virginia clay. It's rich, mineral rich, but it's tough to dig. And when I started digging, literally digging my first beds in this garden area here, first of all, I tried to rototill it and with a smaller tiller, and it was just impossible. It was just too thick. The grass in this field has not been, there's been nothing formally growing in this field for many, many, many decades. The roots were and root matter was so thick and dense and very rich organically, but it was just tough. So then I went to trying to do a double dig method, and that was successful, but boy, oh boy, was it labor intensive. And also I found that it just, with the heavy clay, there were some issues with that as well. So at any rate, I started reading more about different methods, and I thought, well, I will give the no-dig method a try, which for my very first beds really meant putting cardboard down and then putting compost on top and then letting it sit and then planting into that. Very, very successful. And so I just gradually began to build out bed by bed. Each year I did some more, and I expanded this garden tremendously. So all of my methods involve some use of natural materials. I use to start the garden, I did bring in a lot of compost. And fortunately, we have a great compost company not far from us that is organic and is very trustworthy in terms of the materials that they use. So I did invest in a lot of compost because at that point, I wasn't really making my own. And the first methods that I was really using quite a lot of compost on my very first beds. All right, let me just show you some of those beds and how I made them. This bed right here was my very first no-dig bed, and it was made in the traditional way. I put cardboard down straight on the grass, and then I covered it with about 4 inches of compost, and then I covered that on top. I didn't even use hay on top. And then I planted tomatoes in it that first year, and it did great. And since then, I just take care of it by adding compost each fall and then putting a nice heavy mulch on. That has not happened yet in this bed because I still have things growing in it, kale particularly. You can see on the side how there's hay on top. And all of these beds, every single one was made in a no-dig fashion. Generally speaking, inside this area right here, cardboard is under everything, including the mulch paths. And I will say that a wood chip path I highly recommend it. And one of the things that I learned from my gardening is that if you can manage your paths, then you're going to have a much easier time. The great thing about using wood chips in the paths, not on the beds, is that it decomposes and it just enriches the soil. So any of the beds where you have things growing, the roots of the plants will come out into the ground. and it's really quite fertile. Let's just take a look and see what I mean. Now, this wood chip path, this part, the particular one is, I re-wood chip it. I usually add a layer of new chips every season in the spring. But you can see, even though the wood chip additions were about 4 inches, it's really gone down quite a lot and compressed. And if you dig down into the soil, it's really rich and quite friable. So the wood chip paths I am a great fan of, if you can get your hands on some good wood chips. Now, I have a whole lot of videos about making gardens, the NoDig beds, and you can check those out on my NoDig playlist. But one of the things that I do emphasize is to really build your pathways at the same time that you build your garden beds. It's gonna help with encroaching weeds and create a really good barrier. And so I became an expert at scouting out cardboard and grabbing it when I could. When I went back to the city and it was recycle day, I would go through the alleys with my car and just pull boxes that I found, which was great because people were ordering lots and lots of, somebody gets a refrigerator, you're going to get a good box for your garden. So that is one of the big things. Weed management is a whole lot easier with a no-dig garden. And if you can manage your paths really well using wood chip, then you're going to have very, very few weeds. Now, these particular beds were made in a slightly different method, a method that I learned from a permaculturist in Australia named Moran Gamble. And she has a slightly different method. And I will say these beds are every bit as productive as the other ones. I have found very little difference in the productivity in these beds, whether they were made with the cardboard first on the ground or the Moran Gamble method, which I'm going to talk about in just a second. Now, this part of the garden, all of these beds in the lower part of my garden were made with that method. You cut the grass down and then put the compost directly onto the grass, and then put a paper barrier of newspapers, and I also use brown paper bags, a thick layer over top of the compost, and then mulched it down with hay. And that instead of having the cardboard as the weed barrier, then you had the paper as a weed barrier, keeping light out and seeds out as well. Now this kind of gives you a look, because I haven't finished putting this bed to bed yet for the season. This is where my nasturtiums and cucumbers were growing, and you can see what the ground really looks like. Now, sometimes I mulch with hay, sometimes I mulch with leaves, dried leaves. This particular bed last year was mulched with dried leaves. I'm going to sort of alternate year by year. But you can see, let me take my glove off, you can see just, and the garden is a little cold right now, but just how friable this soil is. Now, if I were to dig way down, what you would find is way down beneath, this soil is super, super red. But you can see that over now, this is let's see, about the 4th year for this bed. It is really, really perfectly rich and friable. So technically, all I would really need to do in here is come in, clear up this business if I wanted to, and throw some hay on top, and it would be good to go. What I will do, I like to do just a little extra boost. I'll give a thin layer of compost in here, and then I may put some alfalfa pellets down as well. And that just adds some nice enzymes and some additional green matter in, and then I'll throw the mulch on top. As you can see, this year I'm using hay mulch on top. And that works pretty darn well. This September and every fall, early fall or late summer, and sometimes in the early spring, I always get a load of hay, and I keep it out. Why do I keep my hay out? Well, I want it to begin to rot down, and that's going to become an awesome mulch for my gardens. If you read about no-dig gardening, ultimately you're going to come across the Ruth Stout method. And yes, I've tried that too, successfully, in some of my beds. In actuality, I use kind of a modified Ruth Stout method in a lot of my gardens. But let me show you my official Ruth Stout bed, which I've been using for potatoes. Beneath the hay here is what I refer to as my 4x4, maybe a little bit bigger. It might be more like a 4x6 Ruth Stout bed, which I have successfully grown potatoes in for 3 years, and also pumpkins after the potatoes. This is just made very simply by cutting the grass low and putting spoil rotten hay about 2 feet high on top of it and letting it mulch down. And that's exactly what I do. You can see all the hay going way, way down. It's going to mulch down throughout the season. And if I dug down deep into this, you would find that this is incredibly now rich, rich, rich soil. And I just have been growing potatoes in it and pumpkins, and it's been doing great. Now you can see here some of my stockpile cardboard because I'm getting ready to do some more beds and pathways up in there. And this is kind of a little sense of how you can just start in a small plot to do your no-dig system. This is actually going to have an archway in it, and this is where I'm growing hops. So beneath the hay is some organic matter, and actually the hops plants that I transplanted from another location just a few days ago. This will ultimately get wood chipped, and there will be a big trellis that will go up. Another way that you can build a very effective no-dig bed is just to take hay bales or straw bales, put them straight on the ground, and just leave them for a good season or 2 seasons. They will mulch down, and you will have a great planting surface. Let me show you an example. This bed right here is what I call my melon patch. And you can see I've got one more hay bale, that's actually a straw bale, sitting right there at the end just to extend this bed a little bit more. This is really simple to do. I started just by putting some bales of, I think it was hay originally, but you can also use straw, just side by side all the way down this space. And I then came and lifted them in the spring, or I broke them up more in the spring, and I was left with a great planting area. Now, one thing I will tell you, if you just use that method of just putting hay straight on the ground like that, I did, when I went to plant, I took some compost, like a shovel full of compost, and I put that into the planting space and then planted my seeds directly in there, or my transplants if I was using transplants. I had beautiful, beautiful watermelons and beautiful cantaloupes coming out of there, so clearly it works. But you do, just experiment with some different methods, and you'll come up with all kinds of different ways of doing no-dig gardening. And what's another way of doing a no-dig gardening? Well, you can actually use wood chips. And I have built a couple of beds by putting down well-aged wood chips. That's a key. Don't just put down fresh wood chips. Let them age for at least a good half a year if you can. I cut the grass short as I could, and then I put down a layer of about 4 inches of wood chips. Onto that, I sprinkled blood meal, which sounds totally disgusting, but it's high nitrogen. The wood chips are carbon, the blood meal is high nitrogen. Put them together and you get a compostable material. Compost will happen. So I just liberally did that, washed that in, put some fish emulsion on it to get that to jumpstart the process. Then I added some alfalfa pellets on top of that, water that in, and then a good bunch of hay, about 2 feet of hay to really mulch that down. Water it in, and if it doesn't rain, water it in, give it a good watering once a week. What you're doing is just sheet mulching or sheet composting, and it's made a great bed. I did a small test bed last year that was about a 4x4 space for potatoes, and then just this fall in September, I did another longer bed to connect with that one, and you can see a video on that. I'll try to, I have a whole no-dig playlist, and you can find a lot of these videos, but I'll connect a couple of them in the description below. It's a really, 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 really good method. And so what can you grow in your no-dig bed? Anything you want. That is for sure. I have grown just about everything kind of plant that I can think of a vegetable nature, and also some flowers too. It's just a fantastic method, and I find it's a great time saver. Your labor is put in building the beds, but you know what? You gather, then actually a lot of that time is spent just gathering the materials that you need. But if you have stuff on hand, like you've got some hay bales or you've got leaves or something like that, and you can do this very, very inexpensively and cheaply. If you've got a place to stockpile materials, that's even better. That way you can just come out, do a section. My garden is approximately altogether, it's about 52 feet long and about 30 feet wide. And that has growing beds on the external side, on the borders, all the way around it. And, you know, every single one of those beds, I've just built it slowly myself, sometimes with help from family or friends. If you come and visit me at certain times of the year, you're gonna get put to work. Just ask my friend Meredith. She came for lunch and made a bed, made a garden bed. So you can just do it chunk by chunk over time, and you end up with a fantastic, it just gets better and better every single year. So the key is mulching, mulching, mulching. Keeping up with your mulching during the growing season, and also very importantly during the off seasons. That's where you're really going to get that breakdown on composting going on that is so good. I'm not compost independent, but I have produced about 75% of the compost that I use now, just from kitchen scraps and some cutting clippings from the garden and stuff like that. So it's definitely doable. And once you get your garden beds established, you don't use as much compost. But I will emphasize that getting them started, if you're using compost, you're going to need to have a good bit of it and a good supply. So there are other little cautions and caveats, like source your stuff carefully. Definitely just don't buy hay from anybody or straw from anybody. Ask your farmer whether they use any pesticides or any weed suppressants on that, because that's very important. Otherwise, you'll kill your garden, and that's not good. So, anyway, that is my exposition on no-dig gardening. But I wanted to put it out this time of year because it's not too late to start a no-dig bed. You can do it right now. In fact, it's a great thing to do during the winter months, December. I usually build my beds anytime from, you know, November through the beginning of February. If you start it in February, though, you won't really be able to plant into it until a little bit later, maybe May, or maybe make it a pumpkin bed and plant them in early June. But it's not too late. And if you started your bed right now and did it in January, you'd have a really nice garden bed ready to go for spring planting. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, be sure you like and subscribe, and do share my channel. I'm trying to grow it, and maybe you'll grow along with me. Thanks. Bye.